What's the scariest thing that has happened to you that you cannot explain rationally? Story 1. In high school, I had the basement bedroom all to myself. We lived in a two-story home that was no more than 40 years old, though it always felt older to me since my grandparents had lived there before my family moved in. That first year in the house was also my first year of high school, and I loved having a room all to myself. Until then, I had shared a room with one or more siblings my entire life. There were 4 doors in my room. One led to a bathroom, one to one of the main rooms in the basement, one to a small walk-in closet, and one to a small unfinished storage room with a drain in the middle. The sprinkler system controls were located in that storage room, which I always thought was a strange place for them, since it was probably the farthest point in the house from the outside. Our basement also had small windows near the ceiling, just big enough for a person to crawl through if necessary. Other than letting in a little light, they were useless, as they had been painted over when the house was built and were basically sealed shut. On the outside, the windows sat 2 to 3 feet below ground in wells covered by plastic domes. That first year of high school was quite an experience for me. I had been homeschooled through 7th grade and then moved after 8th grade, so everything felt new. Social anxiety had always been a bit of a problem for me. It still is, but at that point I chalked up all the fear and awkwardness I felt to just being a weird kid. I also struggled with depression throughout high school, and in an effort to fight it, I tried to keep myself involved in as many activities as possible. I did everything from sports to clubs to plays and musicals. At the peak of certain seasons, I would have days where I left for wrestling practice at 4:30 in the morning and didn't get home until 10 at night or later, after musical practice. Needless to say, I was exhausted most of the time. That's why it felt so strange when I began waking up in the middle of the night on a regular basis. It started out as just an occasional thing, sometimes for obvious reasons, like having a bad dream or someone using the main floor bathroom, which was loud with the pipes running right above my bed. Then, about a month before the end of the school year, there was a night when I woke up suddenly, terrified for no apparent reason. It took me a while to calm down and eventually fall back asleep. When I woke up the next morning, I tried to piece the experience together and figured it must have been a bad dream I couldn't remember. The rest of that week passed without incident, but that weekend it happened again. I woke up panicked, breathing heavily and sweating, and this time I knew for sure I hadn't been dreaming. I glanced at my alarm clock, 3:23 in the morning. Once again, it took time to calm down and drift back to sleep. For quite a while, I just lay there staring at the wall, wondering what was happening to me. Another week went by, and I continued waking up every few nights, sometimes with the same overwhelming sense of dread, other times so gradually that I began to question whether I had even been asleep. The strangest part for me, given my religious background, was that every time I looked at the clock, it was exactly 3:23 in the morning. School ended, but the episodes continued, and I was waking up several nights a week. Being the weird kid I was, I didn't think to tell my parents. It became normal, and I learned to cope with it. At the time, it didn't seem so bad until I had a face to put with the fear. By this point, I was early into my 2nd year of high school. The frequent waking didn't affect me much at school. My grades were fine, and I still had plenty of energy to keep up with all the activities I was involved in. One way I found to get more consistent sleep was by staying at friends' houses. I had a good number of close friends, and I often spent nights at their homes because I discovered I wouldn't wake up randomly at night when I was somewhere other than my own room. One night in December of that year, I was planning to stay at my best friend's house. We had spent the afternoon hanging out at my place but planned to head over to his later. The plan was to stay up late, play video games, and drink way too much Mountain Dew. It was finally the weekend. What I hadn't planned on was my dad getting furious over some trivial thing. He took out his anger on me by driving my best friend home and not letting us hang out that night. I went along with them, sitting in the back of the car, sulking and building up my own anger at my dad and the unfairness of the situation. We were on the highway, about halfway to my friend's house, when I suddenly had an overwhelming urge to open the door and jump out of the car. It terrified me, because even with my depression, I had never felt anything like that before. Startled, I forced myself to look toward the front of the car and away from the window, and I immediately regretted it. Aside from my dad and my friend sitting in the front of the SUV, I was the only other person in the car. But when I glanced at the rearview mirror, I saw myself reflected, and behind me, another face, clouded in shadow, just inches from mine. I whipped around and almost shouted, but there was nothing there. I didn't want to say anything to my dad, given the situation, so I sat silently, spending the rest of the drive glancing over my shoulder, waiting to see it again. When we finally got back to the house, I went straight to bed, desperate for the day to be over. But it was far from over. 3:23 in the morning, there it was again, the time I had become far too accustomed to seeing. I tried to breathe deeply, telling myself it was just some strange bodily reaction and that I would grow out of it. I turned over and began the slow process of falling back asleep. But then I noticed how quiet it was, too quiet for my house. Eerily quiet, especially with the lack of outside noise thanks to the time of year and the snow on the ground. I lay on my side, staring at the wall with my back to the rest of the room, straining to hear anything in the silence. The only sound I could make out was the soft thump of my own heartbeat, growing faster and heavier. The dread was returning, the sick twist in my gut that I had come to expect at this hour. Until now, I had always managed to fight it off. I tried to control my breathing and tell myself that my fear was irrational, but it kept rising, welling up into my chest and drowning out any remaining sense of comfort I had managed to establish. That was when I heard another sound. My own pulse seemed to vanish as I strained to catch what else I was sensing. Unmistakable horror filled my ears and chest at the same time. Footsteps, slow, soft, deliberate, padding across the carpeted floor and coming closer to my bed. I had never truly understood the phrase "frozen in fear" until that moment. I wanted desperately to turn and face whatever had been tormenting me, but my body refused to move. The footsteps crept closer and closer. I did the only thing I could, squeezed my eyes shut and muttered a prayer, convinced that only something supernatural could save me now. Then, suddenly, the silence returned. The footsteps were gone, and I felt control of my body trickling back. Still lying on my side, I listened for any trace of the sinister presence I could still feel nearby. After several long moments, I finally rolled over to see an empty room, dimly illuminated by the light from the small window across from my bed. But something was wrong. A strange shadow moved within the light. I looked up at the window and the horror surged back. Just outside, staring in at me, was the same face from earlier that night. Even though the light behind it should have made it impossible to see, I could make out the eyes dark, empty, and the most skin-crawling smile I had ever seen. Once again, I was frozen with fear. Somehow, I managed to pull my covers up until only my eyes were visible. The face and I stared at each other. I don't remember what thoughts ran through my head at that moment, only the feeling of absolute terror at what I was seeing. At some point during this staring contest from hell, I blinked and it was gone. I stayed up the rest of the night, eyes fixed on that window, until exhaustion finally overtook me. When I woke up the next morning, I went outside to check the window well. There were no tracks in the snow leading to it, nor did it look as though the plastic dome had been disturbed. The events of that night finally pushed me to talk to my parents about it. They assured me I was probably just having nightmares, letting my imagination get the better of me, and reminded me that if anyone were trying to break in, the security system and the dog would make sure we all knew it was happening. I still don't know what it was, but I'm convinced it wasn't just something in my head. Since high school, I finished college, started working full-time, and moved to another city. Yet I still wake up at night for no clear reason. These days, I don't even bother checking the clock anymore. But deep down, I feel like I already know what time it would be if I did. 3:23 in the morning. Before we continue, do us a quick favor, smash that like button and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. I have 2 stories. First, the night before had been a late one. I usually stayed up far too long playing guitar, playing video games, or sitting in the McDonald's drive-thru at 2 in the morning just to grab food before playing even more games. I had set an alarm for 9, since I've always been a heavy sleeper. Without one, I've slept as long as 20 hours straight. That morning, I was lying on my back, since the old couch I'd crashed on couldn't support side sleeping. I turned toward the clock and opened my eyes. The entire room was engulfed in black smoke, beginning about 2 feet off the ground. I couldn't see the clock on my bookshelf. I couldn't see the clock on the wall. The parts of the room that were visible were darkened and vague, like the faint glow at the edge of a country road at night. As I turned my head to scan the room, my eyes instantly locked onto a pair of red eyes, mere inches above my face. I buried my head as far back into the pillow as I could, but my eyes stayed locked on those red ones. And bear with me here, fellows and fellowettes. I prayed. I used to be a super Christian, the kind who prayed, read scripture, worshipped, and played guitar at night. And as I prayed, the smoke in the eyes began to drift upward toward the ceiling. After just over a minute, the smoke started to thin as it moved through the ceiling at the edge of the room. Around the perimeter, the ceiling began to show again, the smoke shrinking into an ever-diminishing circle. The eyes stayed fixed on me the whole time, unblinking. I propped myself up on my elbows and watched as the smoke finally stopped moving, leaving a small 1-foot circle around the eyes. Then, poof, the smoke and the eyes were gone, and the lingering darkness in the room vanished with them. Remember, this was at 9 in the morning, and the sun was already up outside the window. Yet the sunlight never entered the room. The whole time, the smoke and eyes were present. The moment they vanished, I was nearly blinded by the sudden flood of light. And no, this wasn't sleep paralysis. Second story. I have a mission trip to Africa coming up. The one and only mission trip I've ever taken. Not long ago, I had a dream about it. In the dream, my team and I were on a battleship in the middle of the ocean. While praying together, someone had a word that a demon was going to attack me. When the prayer ended, we all went our separate ways. Some to eat, some to navigate the boat, others to handle whatever ship things needed doing. I went outside to watch the storm. Boat or not, even my unconscious mind knows storms are cool. When I stepped onto the deck, there was a man standing there, waiting for me. I knew exactly who it was. The demon began speaking to me, launching into a discourse about the evils and flaws of Christianity. It tried to persuade me to leave my team and jump off the boat with it, promising to take me over to its side. But through the entire conversation, I refused. The discussion with the demon ended abruptly. Either it realized I couldn't be turned, or it simply lost patience. It said something about our conversation being fruitless. Then, right before my eyes, it shed its human skin, transformed into nothing but teeth, and devoured me alive. In the dream, I had to endure it until I died. Fast forward to the mission trip itself. We were in Kenya, in a place called Ongata Rongai. I'm not sure I'm spelling that right. Less than 30 minutes outside of Nairobi. Our 13-person team had split into smaller groups to pray with and assist locals from the church hosting us. About 2 hours into the morning, while in mid-conversation with the other 3 members of my group, we were stopped by a man asking for prayer. It was the man from my dream. His eyes were steel-colored, literally no pupils, nothing, like a blind person but metallic, like liquid metal had filled them. He looked at me and asked, "Do you know me?" "Yes," I said. And then it started. We proceeded to have the exact same conversation from my dream. 3 distinct voices came from this one man, switching in and out, trying to extol the virtues of Muhammad, of Buddha, and of Jah. I'm a huge apologist. I study Christian reason, history, doctrine, and I had answers ready. Arguments against his claims, and for Christ came naturally. About 5 minutes in, I held up my hand and said, "Wait a second." I quickly told my team in about 30 seconds about the dream I'd had, that this man was possessed, and that they needed to start praying. They did. And then the man and I continued talking. For 45 minutes, we went back and forth. The entire time, those steel eyes stared at me. And then, just like in the dream, it ended. "This is proving fruitless," the man said. He looked down. When he looked back up, the steel eyes were gone. His knees buckled and he collapsed against me. Now he had normal brown eyes, with normal black pupils. The demons were gone. "Please," he said, his voice shaking with terror. "You must pray for me. Pray for me now." We prayed for him and told him which church was hosting us. He said he would come, but we never saw him again that week. Because of the encounter, we were late getting back to the church for lunch. It wasn't far, maybe a quarter mile, and everyone walked everywhere except on the main highway with the freakish Mattis roaring past. But the moment we started walking back, I felt something wrap around my throat. It was subtle at first, but real. Then a sharp pain began in my stomach, then in my head. I told my team what was happening, exactly what I felt, and said, "We need to pray when we get back." By the end of that quarter mile, I could barely walk. I couldn't breathe. My vision started to go. It felt like claws were tracing the inside of my stomach. I barely made it across the church threshold before collapsing. The team rushed to pray. They brought the pastor, anointing oil, everything. Hours later, everything lifted in an instant, like a weight torn away, all at once. After this, everyone else on the team began experiencing nightmares and physical attacks. Things started happening to them that had never happened before. One teammate was rushed to the ER after she began vomiting blood. She described it as feeling like claws tearing at her stomach. We decided to fast for several days, on top of everything else we were doing. And then, again, it all lifted. But this time, something shifted. People began to be healed of conditions they'd been dealing with long before the trip. Small things like ulcers, big things, like one teammate who'd had surgery as a child and had been told she'd never be able to have children. When she returned to the States, she learned that something inside her body had been restored, something doctors said was gone forever. She was told she could now have kids. I lost touch with her, so I don't know if she ever did, but the possibility was back. Third story. I've got 4 kids, a 5th on the way, and my oldest is only 6. No twins, no duplicates of any kind yet, just a busy house. I wanted to show my oldest 2 the good Star Wars movies, so they'd know who to dress up as for Halloween. But everyone kept warning me the aliens would scare them. So last weekend, I sat them down and asked about scary stuff. What freaks you out? What wouldn't? They both said aliens and monsters wouldn't scare them. To test it, I showed them something creepy from Reddit. Not even a blink. Okay, fine. So I upped the ante, a gif of the monster from Mama sprinting at the camera. My oldest laughed. My second just looked at me and said, "What else?" So I decided to kick it up a notch. Every notch. "You guys sure you want to see more?" I asked. "Yes," they said. With scary-looking monsters that will take you away and eat you? Yes. I played the short YouTube video Lights Out, only 2 minutes and 42 seconds long. I stopped it multiple times to check if they wanted to keep going. They did. They watched the whole thing, unfazed. Meanwhile, I was wetting my pants. One last trick remained. I found a jump scare video with a maze, and just before the last maze ended, the face jumps out at you. That did it. Both kids lost it. Crying, screaming, terror hitting them like nothing else had before. 12 hours straight, sleeping with the lights on, every little noise a panic. I woke up in the middle of the night to my second child yelling for help, panicked, shaking, tears streaming down his face. I rushed into the room and picked him up. He kept looking around the room, terrified, as I tried to calm him. After 5 long minutes, he finally started to relax. When he could finally listen, I asked, "Are you ready to talk?" He nodded, just a little. "What's wrong?" I said gently. Out of nowhere, he started shaking again, like Ellie holding the Jell-O in Jurassic Park. Honestly, understandable considering what I'd shown him. "It's okay," I whispered. "Settle. Stop shaking. I gotcha. Now tell me, what's wrong?" Still trembling, eyes darting over my shoulder, he suddenly screamed, "That monster wants to eat us." And then he kicked me in the chest to get away from whatever he thought was coming through his bedroom door behind me. There was nothing there. Nothing except a brand new line of crap where I'd just blown out my pants. Fourth story. Surprisingly, it wasn't my wife after story number 3. She's a trooper, pregnant and all, and I made her deal with nights of no sleep thanks to my dumb dad's decisions. Obligatory ice cream deliveries were ensured. Note: I've noticed that long stories, if good, sometimes get gold. These tales seem to always get a rise out of people, and story number 3 is only a week old. If I happen to get lucky enough to receive a gift of gold, please don't give it to the OP of a thread or someone in their depression or a related sub to offer a bit of light to their day. I don't need it. I only need sleep and nothing else. Story 3. I've had a few weird things happen in my life. My Pop-Tart incident still trips me out, but I think I can chalk that one up to somebody messing with me. The one that still scares me, though, happened at a cabin. It creeps me out for 2 reasons. First, if it was all in my head, then I must have been in a really dark place at the time. And second, if it really happened, then what on earth did I see? I'll be the first to admit that everything I'm about to describe could have been in my head. The mind is a freaky thing, and it can play some seriously trippy tricks on you. Sorry for the length, but this one still shakes me. Whenever I was scared as a kid, my dad always told me, in life you shouldn't be afraid of ghosts. Fear the living because they can actually hurt you. In my late teenage years, I came into some money after my father took his own life, and I received an inheritance from him. At the time of my dad's passing, he and my mom owned a cabin in Oregon near Mount Bachelor. My mom could no longer afford the payments, and renting it out wasn't covering the costs, so the cabin had been put up for sale. It was set to go on the market in less than a month, with paperwork already in motion through the realtor and lawyer. For that month, it would be vacant, no longer available for rent. I saw this as a chance to get away for a while and clear my head amidst everything going on. I quit work, packed my snowboarding gear, grabbed my dog, and headed up in my dad's car, the one he had willed to me, to the cabin. This was our family cabin, which my parents rented out when we weren't using it. I had keys and knew the alarm codes, so I didn't feel the need to check in with the rental management company about my stay. It has nothing to do with the story that follows, but I felt it was worth mentioning. My first 2 days at the cabin were completely normal. I spent my days playing with my dog in the snow, snowboarding, and my evenings on the balcony, smoking, drinking, listening to music, or playing PlayStation. I had already stocked up on food, cigarettes, and liquor, so I was essentially a shut-in, venturing out only to hit the slopes. With my dog as company, and DVDs and PlayStation as entertainment, I felt content, relaxed, even after all the drama that had led up to this getaway. The cabin itself was 2 stories. The bottom floor held the living room, a side guest bedroom, and a small kitchen. Upstairs, the cabin had 2 more rooms and a walkout balcony attached to the master bedroom. Most of my time was spent in the living room, kitchen, or master bedroom. I never ventured into the other rooms and always kept their doors closed. Open doors leading into dark spaces had always creeped me out. By the 3rd day, I had settled into my routine, playing with my dog midnight. He's passed since, watching DVDs, and gaming. That day, heavy snow blanketed everything, and I decided not to trek down the hill to the main road. I stayed in. That's when things started to feel off. In our area, there were only 2 other cabins near ours, maybe a block away from each other. All the rest were at least a mile away, surrounded by thick forest and towering pine trees. That detail will matter later. For the past couple of days, I knew those 2 nearby cabins were empty. No one was staying there. Enough background. Here's where things got weird. Around midday, while outside with my dog, I noticed footprints in the snow circling the area around our cabin. It was still snowing, but the tracks looked semi-fresh, as if someone had been there within the last 20 or 30 minutes. I figured maybe someone was staying in one of the nearby cabins and I just hadn't noticed. Maybe they were shut-ins like me. Fine, whatever. The prints led away from my cabin and vanished into the denser part of the trees. I brushed it off, went back inside, and tried not to think about it. Night fell, and I finally decided to call it a night. Midnight, my dog was curled up on the bed beside me when his ears suddenly snapped upright. That frozen listening posture dogs get when something's off. A second later, he bolted, jumped off the bed, nails clicking against the floor, and raced downstairs into the living room. I stayed still, heart thumping, straining to hear. Down below, I could make out his movements, padding back and forth, restless. 5 minutes crawled by before he came charging back up. This time, he was doing his "I need to go" dance. Great. I couldn't say no to him, so I threw on a jacket and we headed downstairs into the driveway. Only, he didn't want to pee. The second we stepped outside, he lunged forward, tugging at his leash, trying to drag me somewhere. His eyes were fixed on the dense trees where I'd seen those footprints earlier, but he kept breaking his gaze to sniff along the side of the house, and then he'd look up toward the roof. When it became obvious I wasn't going to follow him into the dark, he gave up, sat down, and just stared into the tree line, totally still, totally silent. That wasn't like him at all. Maybe there were animals out there, but screw this. I wasn't about to find out. I hauled him back inside and locked the door. We headed upstairs. About half an hour later, I was lying in bed, half asleep, when I heard it. Hooves, or at least that's what it sounded like. Slow, deliberate steps on the roof directly above me. 6, maybe 7 of them, evenly spaced. I told myself it was nothing, a pine cone falling from one of the massive pines. Maybe some squirrel or raccoon skittering around. But the steps were spaced apart like a person's stride. That's what got to me. Midnight had heard it too. He sprang to the balcony door, tail rigid, eyes fixed upward, waiting for me to open it. All right, I muttered to myself. I'm not a kid. I'm built. I can handle myself. At the time, I really believed that. So, I grabbed my coat, shoes, cigarettes, and flashlight. Screw it. If something was out there, I was going to see it. I slid open the balcony door and stepped out into the cold. My lighter flicked and the cigarette's glow briefly lit my fingers. Snow fell quietly around me. I raised the flashlight, sweeping it across the roof. Nothing. No tracks. No disturbance in the fresh snow at all. Just clean white powder. Weird. Really weird. Midnight had definitely heard it too, but maybe he was just picking up on my paranoia. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. I took another drag of my cigarette and tried to calm my heartbeat. My eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness, the stars above cutting through the falling snow like cold pinpricks of light. I kept smoking, the glow of the cigarette the only warmth on my fingers, staring at the tall trees that hemmed in our cabin like a silent army. That's when I saw it. In a tree a little taller than the cabin, maybe 20 feet from the balcony, something crouched. At first my brain refused to process it, but the longer I stared, the clearer it became. It looked like a man or something shaped like a man crouched low between 2 branches. Its feet were balanced on one branch, and its long arms stretched up, clutching the branch above its head like a predator ready to spring. What the hell is that? I froze. I didn't move, didn't even breathe. Behind me, Midnight had stood, hackles raised, pacing in a tight circle with a low, frantic bark under his breath. The thing didn't move, not an inch, just clung there, watching. My cigarette burned down to the filter. I crushed it out without looking away, every instinct in my body screaming at me not to shine my flashlight on it, as if doing so would make it real. Moving slowly, I stepped backward into the room, never turning my back to the thing, dragging Midnight with me. Once we were inside, I locked the balcony door, and heart hammering, finally aimed my flashlight at the tree. Nothing. Empty branches swaying in the snow. I yanked the curtains shut and retreated to bed. The image burned into my mind. Later that night, I woke to the faintest sound. Tap, 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 tap. It was coming from the balcony's screen door. Not loud, more like someone gently drumming their fingers against the glass. It didn't stop, just kept going, perfectly steady for what felt like an hour. Midnight sat up in bed and stared at the door but wouldn't go near it this time. His ears were pinned back, his whole body tense, like he knew something I didn't. The strangest part wasn't the sound itself, it was the feeling that came with it. The longer it went on, the stronger the sense that something was silently inviting me to open the door, as if all I had to do was pull the curtain aside, unlatch the lock, and it would be right there waiting. But over that invitation, clear as day, was my dad's voice in my head. Don't do it. Stay in bed. Don't open that door. So I didn't. I lay there rigid, staring at the ceiling, listening to the tapping until at some point exhaustion won and I drifted off. When I woke in the morning, Everything was normal. No tracks, no marks on the glass, just sunlight streaming in like nothing had happened. The rest of the week passed without a single incident. No sounds, no shapes in the trees, just me, my dog, and the snow. I'll admit, it could have been all in my head. I was in a bad place back then, grieving and alone, and the mind can do strange things, but it still bugs me even now. I'm married now, with 2 young kids, and my life is as normal as it gets. But I'll be honest, even after all these years, part of me is still afraid of the dark. Saying that out loud feels strange, but there it is. Story 4. Way late to this thread, but my story is both unexplainable and bonus almost killed me, so it's got a little extra wow factor. About 4 years ago, my male friend, let's call him Sam, and I decided to go camping. I'd known him for years. He's one of my best friends, so I wasn't at all weirded out by the idea of camping alone with him. But I figured, why not invite someone else along? The more the merrier. So I asked a girlfriend to come. We'll call her Rita. We picked a spot I hadn't been to in a couple of years, but I still remembered the general direction. We stopped at a gas station in a tiny town just before the turnoff and asked if we were heading the right way. The attendant just pointed toward the horizon and said, "Follow the storm." Sure enough, huge black clouds had gathered exactly in the direction of our campsite. This was without a doubt the most terrifying storm I'd ever seen. And let's be honest, what's a story without a crazy storm, right? We sat in the car, debating whether to call it and head home. But being a little reckless, we decided to tough it out. We actually liked camping in the rain during storms. There was something thrilling about it. We started driving down the dirt road, deep in the middle of nowhere. As we got closer to the campsite, a horrible feeling settled in my chest. I can't explain it. I just knew something bad was coming. Eventually, we decided to turn around. The storm was insane. Lightning striking just outside the car, rain hammering down like bullets. It felt way too dangerous to continue. As soon as we left the forest, though, it was like flipping a switch. Boom, no storm, clear skies. We figured maybe the storm was localized, so we could try camping somewhere else. About 20 minutes outside of town, there's a reservoir with a man-made lake and a few camping spots. We parked there, unloaded our gear, and started down the trail that runs around the lake, looking for a spot with more privacy. The spot where we'd parked was right at the trailhead, and a couple was already set up there. We stopped to chat with them for a bit. They seemed pretty chill, and invited them to join us about an hour later after we'd gotten our campsite set up. The plan was to hang out, play some games, and have a few drinks together. Once we got to our spot and started setting up camp, I got a random text on my phone. That was strange. Cell service is usually terrible out here. It was from another friend, an artist whose career has really taken off in the past few years. I explained where we were, and she replied, "Great, I've been looking for a really big fire recently, and I'm on my way." It was kind of a strange thing to say, but artists can be weird, and she smokes a lot of weed, so half the time I don't even try to make sense of what she's saying. Fast forward a bit. We were having a great time. The other couple came over. We were drinking, laughing, and just enjoying ourselves. Then my artist friend showed up, carrying this monstrosity of a statue. She explained that she'd made it back in her freshman year of college, and that it had brought her nothing but bad luck for the past 4 years. She wanted to finally burn it. I wish I'd felt a flicker of unease, some sense of warning, but I don't usually believe in supernatural stuff, so we all just laughed and tossed the statue into the fire. A couple of hours later, my artist friend pulled out her weed and smoked with Sam. For hours, they passed it back and forth. Sam was already drinking, so he was crossfading hard. Rita and I don't smoke, so we just sat by the fire and talked while the sky went from orange to blue to full darkness. Eventually, the new couple we'd met wandered back to their campsite, leaving just the 4 of us, me, Rita, Sam, and my artist friend. That's when Sam started acting strange. At first, we laughed it off as him being too crossfaded. His voice began to change, not just slurred but different, low, dark, gravelly. It didn't sound like him at all. Then he started babbling. At first it was incoherent mumbling, then the words sharpened. He pulled Rita aside and in that new voice told her he worked for the CIA, had millions hidden in offshore accounts, and that he could make any of us disappear in an instant. Keep in mind, Sam is one of my absolute best friends. I've never once felt scared around him, so we laughed off his veiled threats, joking, "Haha, okay, drunk bun." Around this time, Rita noticed her hatchet. The one we'd been using for firewood had gone missing. We searched everywhere, but it was too dark to find. We eventually gave up until sunrise. Sam, still muttering dark nonsense to himself, sat on the opposite side of the fire pit alone. Eventually, he passed out. Rita and I stayed up, chuckling about how weird he'd been and congratulating ourselves on surviving a fun, bizarre night. About an hour later, we felt raindrops. The storm we'd driven to avoid was finally making its move. It was late, so we decided to get drunk in the tent and try to sleep. This is where things went truly off the rails. We shook Sam gently until he groaned. We told him it was starting to rain and that it was time to head to the tent. He struggled up and Rita and I each grabbed a side to help him. The moment we stopped in front of the tent to unzip it, he went completely insane, totally unrecognizable, possessed by something dark and violent. I'm not exaggerating. He let out a high-pitched, ear-piercing scream that I will never forget. I was bent over, missing the first swing, which sent Rita flying across the camp. Sam spun around with terrifying precision, fully driven by whatever had taken over him. He kicked the last coals from the fire into darkness. It all happened in seconds, yet my brain recorded every detail like slow motion. The fire was out, the campsite was plunged into complete blackness, no moon, just storm clouds and shadows. The next thing I knew, Sam was standing right next to me, so close I could feel his breath. Then, suddenly, I was on the ground. I hit hard enough that the air left my lungs, but that barely mattered, because Sam was sitting on my stomach, his hands wrapped tightly around my throat. He was strangling me with all of his terrifying strength. Sam is one of those towering, muscular types with absurdly long arms. I reached up, trying to push him off, but his arms were so long I couldn't even touch his chest. I scraped at his arms and bucked underneath him, desperate to break free. I could hear Rita screaming my name, frantically searching for me. Darkness crept in around the edges of my vision. Blacking out felt inevitable. It felt like an eternity, though in reality it was only a few minutes. Through my fading sight, I saw Rita punching, kicking, and struggling against him with everything she had, trying to make him release me. Rita is a rugby player, scrappy and relentless. I blacked out for a few minutes here, so I only know what happened from her version of the story. After I went limp, she panicked, convinced Sam had killed me. She went into overdrive, kneeing him in the face again and again. Eventually, her strike stunned him enough for him to release me. She shoved him aside and hauled me up, still unconscious. Dead weight is no joke. Seriously, go Rita. I must have been out for a couple of minutes, but when I came to, she was dragging me down the path, quietly crying. As I regained full awareness, panic hit me in full force. Hysterics, screaming, crying, shaking uncontrollably. Rita urged me to hush, telling me Sam hadn't followed, but we weren't taking any chances. I managed to steady myself enough to start carrying my own weight and walk. To add insult to injury, my flip-flops had fallen off during the attack, and I was now walking barefoot along a painfully rocky path. Every step cut into my feet, making the trek even worse. Rita, being the absolute legend she is, took off her own sandals and slipped them onto my feet. Seriously, this girl deserves sainthood. From our campsite to the parking lot was about 15 minutes under normal circumstances, probably longer now with my trauma and bare feet. Still, the path remained silent behind us. Sam seemed to have been left behind for the moment. Story 5. My first experience was in high school. I was a senior, and we had about a month of classes left. Everyone was on autopilot, just enjoying themselves. A friend of mine was watching two dogs for an older couple who were on vacation for about a month. The husband had actually been our old PE teacher who retired about 6 months earlier. My friend stayed at the house a few nights a week, sometimes with another friend crashing there. About 2 weeks in, both of them looked exhausted. At lunch, they told us the place they were dog-sitting was haunted. Of course, we all said, "You're messing with us," and didn't believe a word. They invited us to come over and stay the night. A few of us agreed, why not? It was a Thursday, but as seniors, we had nothing pressing the next day. We met up early in the evening at the only convenience store in town. We grabbed some food and rented a few movies. There was no cable at the house, so we needed entertainment. 2 cars rolled out together. I was in the lead, and everything was fine until we were within about 100 yards of the house. The car behind me suddenly stalled. The driver coasted into the driveway in neutral, and as soon as he tried to restart the car, it fired right up. We laughed it off, convinced they were still trying to mess with us. Inside, we immediately started grilling the two about trying to pull a fast one. The dogs rushed to the door, all wags and excitement, completely friendly and playful. We got the grand tour of the house, played with the dogs for a bit, and then a few of us headed to the kitchen to throw 2 frozen pizzas in the oven. That's when things got weird. About 10 minutes later, one of the guys and I went back to the kitchen to check on the pizzas. What we found stopped us cold. Every single cupboard door hung wide open. Every drawer was pulled out, and the door to the pantry stood yawning open like a black hole. What the heck? Okay, which one of you sneaky bastards came in here while the rest of us weren't looking? I demanded. The friend beside me held his hands up. It wasn't me, it's the little girl they've been seeing. I still didn't buy it. He sounded sincere, but those two loved messing with people, especially together. They were pros at feeding off each other's stories, so I figured this was just another one of their pranks. A few minutes later, while we're eating and chatting, I glance at the girl who'd come with us. Her back's to the window, and that's when I see her. A small girl with dirty blonde hair runs past the window outside, fast, like she's playing tag. She couldn't have been more than 5 or 6. And I'm not the only one who saw her. The guy hired to watch the dogs saw it. Another friend who came with us saw it. We all froze for half a second, staring at each other. Then, without a word, we jumped up, ran outside, and took an immediate left toward the side of the house. Nothing. Not a single trace. Some quick backstory about where I'm from. The middle of friggin' nowhere. Northern New York State. Not NYC, not even central NY. Way up at the top near Canada and Vermont. Hardly anyone lives up here. It's just woods and more woods. My graduating class had 39 kids, and houses were often a half-mile apart or more. That's exactly how it was with this house, which is why we immediately ruled out a neighbor's kid playing around. There were no neighbor's kids. We went back inside, and the other guy who had been staying off and on with my dog-watching friend just smirked. "See?" he said. "She ran by the kitchen window too." It was still early evening, around 6:30 at the end of May, so it was plenty bright outside. Not dusk, not shadows. We hadn't mistaken some stray dog or weird reflection for a person. Then my friend went to the kitchen to refill the dog's food and water bowls. They were on a feeding schedule. This time, though, both dogs planted themselves at the kitchen threshold, tails wagging, ears up, but absolutely refusing to go in. They'd literally been in there with us 15 minutes earlier, trying to snag a slice of pizza. Now they wouldn't cross the doorway. One of the dogs finally got coaxed in by his collar to eat. The second we let go, though, he bolted straight back out of the kitchen and sat at the threshold again like it was a force field. Weirdest thing I'd seen, especially because these dogs were clearly hungry. In the end, we just gave up and carried their food bowls out to the living room. They ate there without a problem. When they were finished, one of them suddenly barked. One sharp, startled sound, right into the kitchen. The other stayed far away, lying at the foot of the stairs, eyes fixed on that doorway. For two animals that had been waggy, people-friendly shadows all evening, their behavior was unnerving. The rest of the night felt almost normal. We watched a couple of movies, cracked jokes, played with the dog some more, but when it came time to go to bed, the weirdness picked up again. The girl and I ended up crashing in the upstairs bedroom together. Not what you're thinking. Nothing had happened between us yet. The female dog, a medium-sized lab mix, came with us. We left the door open so she could go out if she wanted during the night. All night, the dog kept doing this strange patrol, either curled at the foot of the bed or sitting about 8 feet from the open door, just staring into the hallway. Every so often, she'd growl, low and steady, like she was warning something off. Around 12:45 a.m., after the second or third growl, it happened. The bedroom door slammed shut. It wasn't a breeze. It wasn't one of the guys playing a joke. The door swung inward into the room, and I saw it move with my own eyes. It slammed so hard, it woke up everyone downstairs, the two guys sleeping in the living room, and the other friend down the hall. I'm a fickle sleeper. In new places, I usually stay half awake for a while, so when the dog growled that time, my eyes were already open. I watched that friggin' door move. The dog bolted for the bed, leapt up, and pressed herself against us, shaking like a leaf. I sat straight up, heart pounding. The girl with me jolted awake, swearing under her breath. I flicked on the light, went to the door, and pulled it open just as the two guys from the living room were hurrying up the stairs and our other friend was stepping out of his room from the left, all of us wide-eyed. We found out the next day that the reason they gave us that room was because it had the most activity. Since she and I thought they were exaggerating, it became our room to sleep in. Each of them had slept there once before and hadn't gotten a single hour of rest. After that, they either stayed in the spare bedroom or the living room. To prove the place was haunted, they put us in that room on purpose. The two guys who had been staying there just laughed and said, "I told you so," while the others sleeping downstairs were relieved they weren't in that room. Needless to say, the girl and I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. We kept hearing sounds throughout the night, the patter of little feet in the hall, and at one point I thought I heard giggling. That could easily have been my imagination, like the rest of it, I guess, but I saw that door slam shut with my own two eyes, and it was the most unbelievable thing I've ever witnessed. In the end, the girl and I stayed up talking, asking each other questions, and realizing there was a mutual attraction. One thing led to another, and there was some heavy making out, so it wasn't a terrible experience after all. She was the tomboy type who always wore baggy flannel shirts, so it had never really crossed my mind. She'd always been one of the guys, but it turned out she was hiding a stunning figure under those shirts and an unexpected, adventurous side. So thank you, little ghost girl. You gave two high school seniors one of their first truly thrilling and unforgettable nights by scaring the living daylights out of us. Story 6. Around the time I was a sophomore in high school, my parents decided to tear down our house and rebuild. A lot of people in our neighborhood were doing the same for value purposes. I had made multiple jokes about how cool it would be to have a secret room that no one knew about, but I never actually expected them to consider it. Turns out they worked with the contractor and ended up setting aside an area just for that. Basically, if you were looking inside my closet and turned right, you could walk to the corner where there was a 1.5-foot bar for hanging clothes. If you moved the clothes, there was a wall behind them that you could push open, and bam, the hidden room, fully equipped with a ceiling light and electrical outlets. Imagine how many games of hide-and-seek I won. No one ever found me. The room was my precious secret, and I wasn't going to share it with anyone outside of my family. Unfortunately, after a few months, I started to get tired of the room. First, squeezing past all the clothing became a hassle. Then I had to slide through the tiny opening to get inside, and the room itself wasn't all that big. The magic had worn off, so I stopped going in. Fast forward a couple of months, and things began to get strange. Our family left for vacation for 2 weeks, and we asked one of our neighbors to keep an eye on the house. Crime had been increasing in the area, so she stopped by occasionally just to check. When I finally got back home, I was exhausted and wanted nothing more than to crawl into bed. But when I opened the door to my room, which was dark, I immediately sensed something was off. A faint glow was seeping out from underneath my closet door. Okay, I thought to myself, my neighbor must have been going through my stuff. I walked over to turn off the light, only to see that the closet switch was already flipped down. Confused, I opened the door, and to my horror, all of my clothes had been shoved to the side. The wall to my secret room had been pushed open, and the light was on. How was this possible? No one knew about that room except my parents and the contractor. I stood there in disbelief for about a minute before convincing myself my neighbor must have really explored the place. Wearily, I stepped inside, switched off the light, pushed the hidden wall back into place, and moved the clothes into their usual position. I'm going to try to explain what happened next, as best as I can. Still shaken and confused, I started to step out of my closet. Standing in its doorway, I looked across my room toward the corner where I kept an iron floor mirror. My reflection stared back at me until, suddenly, the closet space behind me lit up again. At the same moment, I heard a scraping noise, or at least I think that's what it was. My heart was pounding so hard that my ears could hear nothing but the rush of blood with every beat. I remember jerking my head back into the closet to find all of my clothes shoved aside, the wall pushed open, and of course the light to the secret room glowing once again. Once I managed to move from my petrified state, I convinced myself that I must have been so confused the first time that I hadn't really closed it at all. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. Over the next few months, strange things kept happening. Nothing major, but odd enough that I couldn't explain it. For example, I'd walk into my bathroom to find the toilet seat left up every single time. At first, I assumed my dad was sneaking into my room to use it, but that would have meant he had a serious case of overactive bladder. When I finally asked him about it, he looked at me like I was crazy and said, "Why would I use your bathroom when we have one down the hall?" I couldn't answer that question. There were other times when I'd wake up in the morning to find my closet door wide open. Before anyone says that's not a big deal, let me clarify. I had been slightly terrified of my closet and made sure every single night that its door was firmly shut before I went to sleep. I would listen for the click, then pull it back and forth a few times just to make sure it was fully closed. There was no reason it should be standing wide open, and there was certainly no explanation for why. On occasion, the light would be turned on in the middle of the night. I know, malfunctioning lights and toilet seats don't sound scary, but bear with me. I was freaked out enough that I finally brought it up to my mom one day while we were both working in our downstairs office. For some background on my mom, she doesn't believe in ghosts at all. In fact, she raised me and my older brother, who had already moved out by the time we were living in the new house, to think that anyone who believed in ghosts was crazy. So when I told her about my suspicions, I was shocked when she sighed and admitted she'd noticed strange things too. I'm not really a storyteller, and I'm getting tired of typing, so I'll try to wrap this up. She went on to tell me that when we first moved into our old house, the one we eventually tore down, she would often hear footsteps walking around in my brother's room. This confused her because he was always at school when it happened, but she could have sworn she heard him running around. One time, when she went upstairs to check, she found toys scattered across his carpet. This startled her because he'd never left his room like that before leaving for school. She then went on to explain that the previous owners of our house had a young son who had passed away in what later became my brother's room, something she had never told me before. I guess she thought I was finally old enough to hear it without forming wild stories about ghosts haunting our home. If that had been her goal, I hate to inform her it absolutely did not work. By that point, I was convinced our house was haunted. She wrapped up her story and laughed it off, as though it were silly to believe there wasn't some logical explanation for all the strange things that had happened. The footsteps in the old house? Just because it was old. The lights and toilet seat issues? Because the house was brand new. Sure, okay. At that point, we swiveled around in our office chairs and went back to working on our computers. After a minute or so, I began to hear a loud, almost white noise sound. I turned to my mom, thinking she'd taken a break and was watching some strange video, but she was staring back at me with the same confused look. "It sounds like your shower is running," she said. My bedroom and bathroom were directly above our heads. Our dazed expressions came from the fact that my shower hadn't worked for over a month. New houses come with a lot of problems. Right as she said that, the water stopped running. Silence filled the air for a split second before we both heard 5 loud footsteps. I watched my mom's face drain of color before she bolted upstairs, past my dad, who was sitting on the couch watching TV. I finally followed her, only to find her tearing through my room, checking the closet, under my bed, everywhere. She tried to explain to my dad what she'd heard, but he brushed it off as some kind of piping issue. Eventually, she went along with his explanation, but there was no way that was just piping. I stayed upstairs, quietly accepting that something strange, though probably harmless, was occupying my room. And then, as I sat there thinking about everything that had happened, it hit me. My current room is exactly where my brother's old room used to be. I know that's not how hauntings work exactly, but it does make for a much more unsettling explanation, doesn't it? Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.